Welcome to Cancer and Peace, everyone. My name is Sean Stewart, and I'm facilitating a conversation with my good friend, Peter Scalzo. He's the host of Cancer and Peace, and we're going to talk about a topic today that is something that maybe you may or may not have heard of before, and the words are going to be benevolent detachment. And I know that sounds crazy. Both you and I have heard this term from the team at Wild at Heart, John Eldridge's podcast. And it's a really interesting conversation. And so I think we're going to describe our experiences and some of the roots behind this. But I think it's an important aspect of getting to peace in a cancer journey. And so I'm going to let you describe a little bit of your experience with it. And then I'm going to give some of my thoughts and feedback related to my own experience and some connection points. And we'll see where it goes.
Okay. Thanks, Sean. I just right now wanted to talk about how I entered into this whole discussion about this. And it really goes back to having doctor's appointments, having to go to the cancer center, do treatments and all that, and getting to the point very recently where I thought I was going to have a panic attack. I would get in my truck to drive down, and I experienced a tremendous amount of anxiety. And I thought I was close to having a panic attack. And there was a couple times I didn't want to. I was not going to go. I forced myself to go down. And I mean, this is after 17 years and being told twice to go home and call hospice and all the surgery. I've been 6 recurrences. And yet there was this feeling that there was this buildup. And so that's when I took the trauma course with our friend and started to do some exercises within that trauma course for my nervous system, which were very helpful. But one of the resources, which is now a resource on the cancerandpeace.com site, is this Wild at Heart, John Eldridge site. And he has an app, and it's a pause app. And it's really about, and I did it for 30 days, and I still do it, like a 3 or a 5 or a 10-minute pause. And it's really a chance to meditate. But at the beginning of each session, he said, okay, folks, we're going to do benevolent detachment. And it's this concept of actually saying, I let go of everyone and everything to you, God. And of course, God is my higher power, Jesus Christ. So it's this concept of letting go, surrendering, taking the weight, the anxious weight off my shoulders and putting it onto my higher power shoulders. And so I thought about this concept for a cancer patient and the sense of detachment, like he calls it benevolent detachment. And of course, I struggle with control. A lot of us do, but I do, where I want to control people, places, and things. And through my recovery process, I know I'm not in control. And about the only thing I have control over is how I'm going to respond to a situation. But I also made the connection in my own life of getting to a place where I could genuinely detach and having that definitely be a pathway to inner peace. Letting go, surrendering. And so this podcast episode, I thought, let's just explore this a little bit. And I kind of hit Sean with this.
We both have been in this a bit, so it's not a foreign concept. And I also have done the full pause app. They have a 30-day program that you can do. And then there's also several other pauses you can do. And I find it to be incredibly helpful. And there was even some concepts that I found in that program that were good. I'll throw one out there. The way you put yourself to bed at night is the way you'll find yourself in the morning. So in other words, it's if you are feeling attached to something and it's causing you anxiety, you're probably going to wake up anxious too, or you're going to wake up in the middle of the night anxious. And so I did want to talk about the opposite of detachment is attachment.
Oh, okay.
And John Eldridge talks a lot about unhealthy attachments. Where have you made unhealthy attachment.
Mm.
And so attachment can be in so many areas of our lives. And we would think of it in recovery circles a lot like codependency. It's getting your value from people, places, and things. These are attachments that are unhealthy. And we focus on those people, places, and things, trying to manipulate, control, acquire, just have those things give us our value.
You must be talking about me right now. Or?
I always have been. Can't be about me. Well, I think this is an interesting thing is that unhealthy attachments, where are you making unhealthy attachments would be a question that he would ask a lot. And I think this is big because I think a cancer patient walks into this journey and the invitation is to develop, is to detach. And it's a positive invitation. I think the cancer journey we talked about in the last episode, a bit of, while you're not grateful for cancer, what the cancer journey did for you was it allowed you to get to a greater level of intimacy with God. And so what you just described was, Lord, I give everyone and everything to you. And it's detaching from everything else and attaching to the one place where there's really value and meaning in life. And that's what the cancer journey, I think, is an invitation to for so many people as they're entering it. And I want to touch more, if you'll let me, just to talk about this concept of, you described a second ago, feelings, and we could call it trauma. I'll put a different word right now, as anxiety. Anxiety whenever you were getting ready to go for a larger treatment or something like that. And this really just sticks out to me from the concept of failure of a nerve, that it's a book that was written out there that really talks about a bit of what it would be to be a non-anxious presence. And in this book, Edwin Freeman, he talks about that the greatest gift that a leader could give to an organization is a non-anxious presence. And on the surface, you're like, well, that, I guess, maybe. But he made a claim, and that claim was that if you did nothing else, if all you did was show up every day and you were just a non-anxious presence, your organization would likely run, like clockwork. It would actually achieve its goals and be very well operated. And so I thought that was a big claim on the surface. And then I started really looking at, well, what does that really mean though? Like, how do you get to be a non-anxious presence? And I think you're starting to describe benevolent detachment, because to be non-anxious means that you actually have to have a deep place that you can hand your anxiety to, that can manage something big enough to manage your anxiety. And that's what you're describing with benevolent detachment, I think. I'll let you throw some comments in here, but that's it was such a big thing to me, starting to think about this a little bit, is how do I do this in my everyday life? And I think any cancer patient should be asking, hey, what's the greatest gift I could give to my world around me? If you've been given a cancer diagnosis, for many, it at least opens that question. And we've talked about this. What does that mean for the rest of my life? What is that? It's something that causes you to question, is this a death sentence? For some, it's certainly that level of seriousness that causes you to start asking those bigger questions in life. And then the very question is, but what does this mean? What's the greatest gift I could give to my family and to those around me? And the argument that's being made by Freeman, I think in that case too, is a non-anxious presence. But you can't get there by just saying, I'm going to be less anxious. I'm going to be less anxious. Right. It doesn't work that way.
I was thinking about that. It has to be a genuine, non-anxious presence.
I can't sit behind my desk in the office and go, I'm not going to be anxious. When this person comes in, I'm not going to be anxious. It doesn't work that way.
Many times people say to me, you seem to be at peace. To me personally, I'm not a peaceful guy. I'm an anxious guy my whole life. I've dealt with that.
Yeah.
Anxiety, fear of failure, just fear. Social fear, all that stuff. So I do at times exhibit this non-anxious presence, and I know it's not what I manufactured up. Does that make sense?
It does. And so I think this starts a little bit with an examination of, you described in your journey there was that, hey, bigger events were triggering you to feel anxiousness, and you could feel it in your nervous system. And this is a concept we've talked about before, is your body is a major prophet, not a minor prophet. When you felt that, you knew there's something underlying that. There's something that's keeping you from being able to experience this non-anxious presence or benevolent detachment. And so in recovery, we have other tools on top of that. So we talked about John Eldridge's Pause app. I think that's a great tool for taking time to sit in the presence of God and examine where you're at and to experience him. But if you're starting at a place of, there's anxiousness, this would be a great place to do what we would call a heart check or a daily inventory,
which we've talked about on earlier podcast episodes.
We have. And I think this is an important concept for getting to benevolent detachment, is like the heart check we described. If you're hurting, exhausted, angry, resentful, or tense, take time to write that down. What is it that you're experiencing? And then go one step past that. What's the why behind it? And the moment you get to the why is, and it could be, I feel fear about this next appointment. And that's the opportunity to then do exactly what you said with the John Eldridge concept. Lord, I'm going to give this fear to you.
And, I know that the listeners of this podcast are in all different places in their journey with spirituality, emotions, and everything. But I know and can testify that my spirituality has been the center of this whole process of getting to a non-anxious presence.
Well, here's what would happen to you, I think, if you didn't have the spirituality.
Yeah.
Let's say you do your heart check and you find that you're anxious or resentful. Where do you go with it?
Right.
It's like all you can do is internalize it and say, I'll do better.
Right.
And what we're saying that our journey of peace has been is learning how to either go externally, ask for forgiveness if you've created reason, if you created the wrong, but also offer forgiveness externally. But if it's anxiousness and you're feeling fear, is going to a place where you can express that fear, and a place where there's hope for tomorrow in that fear.
I mean, I think an overall image for me is an image of my higher power. And it's Jesus Christ saying, come to me all who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest. And it's this concept of taking the burden off of my shoulders and giving it to him. And really, I enjoy an intimacy with my higher power. So I believe that that's real, that he will take that burden. And he has a lot to say about anxiety. And one of the things I love is look at the birds of the air that, you don't see them worried about where they're going to eat or
that's big.
You know what I mean? It's that, that your heavenly Father knows what you need. And so you're going to get it. So this is where my spirituality is key to my life and central to my cancer journey. And that's why that's why I talk about it.
Yeah, I'm curious. I'll describe my own experience of anxiousness, because I wake up a lot of times with anxiety. If I wake up at 3:00 in the morning and my mind is running wild, it's because my mind is trying to control circumstances. And so there's a process that has become really important for me. I think there's two things and one I just talked about a second ago is that, but I'll start with first thing as part of my morning, start the day out time is to do that check of, hey, what's happening? What am I feeling? And then taking time to journal that and get to the root of it, get to the root of the feeling, and then walk through the releasing of that. Because if I can release that feeling to God, then I can move forward the day without trying to manage it, trying to be the control. Because I struggle with being a control freak.
Right.
And so what would happen to me is, as an organizational leader, is I would sense and know where there are problems. Maybe it's financial, or maybe it's some of the staff, or there are problems that are coming my way. We may have right now we have the building department coming up with all kinds of stuff, and I can either own that anxiously or I can just give it to God And not that I don't walk through those. It's not that you don't go to the doctor's appointments. It's not that you don't do the treatments. It's not that I don't go deal with the building department and work through their issues, but I don't have to own the outcome.
Right. I
don't have to control the outcome.
Right.
I do my very best with this moment in time, but I can release the outcome. And I think the outcome piece is the most important part of releasing that. And I think that thing, though, that second part, I talked about it in the morning, is before you go to bed, hey, what are things that I'm still hanging on? What am I attached to now as I go to bed? And it's probably important to, Eldridge talks about this quite a bit about, if you're going to bed at night and you're using TV or some other thing to numb, as opposed to figuring out what you actually are trying to numb and releasing that to God before you go to bed, that's it's like a sea change of difference in peace. Because numbing will work for that, and you may fall asleep because you're tired. But those are the reasons why the reasons why I would wake up, and I do wake up at 3:00 in the morning or 3:30 in the morning. And for me now, if I wake up at 3:30 or 4 in the morning and my mind's going crazy, I don't try to stay there longer. I get up and I go do that examination. I take time to write it down. It doesn't matter if it's 4:00 in the morning. And most of the time I can fall back asleep and I'm there, but I actually have to go through that process of detaching.
Yeah,
I'll call it great. Detaching, yes.
Yeah, I think so in the cancer journey, I've been very vigilant about doing what my doctor wants me to do. I have a head surgeon who's world known, and I've had many surgeries with him and spent a lot of time with him. And we're in uncharted territory. For instance, we're trying to figure out, the medical community is not used to someone with high-grade urothelial metastatic cancer living. And I've been in that space now since 2015. And I've had my surgery where they removed all my urinary sections except for my kidneys and my urethra. That is my original. But, they're just not used to someone living that long. So now, I've got kidney function issues. I have chronic kidney disease, and I have to catheterize myself, 6 times a day kind of thing. I have to go through all these exercises, which I do. Yeah. Which I believe are, that's my responsibility to do that. Yeah. But like you're saying, I am not in control of the outcome. My kidneys may need dialysis at some point coming up. I don't know that. And I think back to a fellow in church who was diagnosed with colorectal cancer, and he and I started our cancer support group, which now has been running 16 years. He lived about 6 years and passed the age of 52. But one thing about him is he was a vice president at IBM, and he had a 3-ring binder for his cancer journey. And he had everything, if you know anything about that corporate intensity, that detail. But anyway, he was trying to be in control of everything that happened within the cancer journey. And his was a stage 4 cancer journey. And at one point I remember him taking the notebook and throwing it out. And I thought, okay, that's right. Because we can be vigilant and diligent, but we really don't have control over the outcome. And I think when we are able to let go like that, benevolent detachment, that's one way to get peace, pathway to peace.
And one of the reasons why I think this is the case, it's striking me as you're saying that it's releasing the lie, because we don't have control. Right. And so what you're really saying is that you're going to start living in reality. And there's a lot of peace when you get to that point where you stop living the lie that I can control where this is at. It doesn't mean that you can't have responsibility and influence your journey. I don't mean to leave a false notion, but the outcome, that's not in your hands. Yeah, it's not in my hands.
I recall, and it's in my book, but I had the elders of the church and the pastors were gracious to have an all-night prayer vigil for me when I got my metastatic diagnosis. And I remember one of the elders looking at me with a very troubled look and saying, have you done everything? Have you researched everything? Have you done everything you can? Like almost like the implication is, have you gone down to Mexico? Have you gone over to Europe? Have you done all the alternatives? And I really at that point answered honestly with a no. I'm going to do what is reasonably necessary. I'm going to do what's in my pathway. And it was the medical journey I was on, the immunotherapy, all that. And I will do those things. I will be reasonable about it, but I'm not going to run around chasing cancer cures because I didn't know how much time I had left. I'm not going to spend my time doing that.
Well, you just described that there's something that you can do, and there's things that you could, if you're in high control, you could, I'll be flippant. I hear there's a penguin treatment in Antarctica that really is showing a lot of promise. And it leaves this impression that, well, if you haven't done the penguin treatment, then you haven't done enough. And there's a point where you have to assess, hey, where do I want to spend my time? Is it, I think there might be something to talk about maybe later on. It's like,
I think for sure, because
the fight, this idea that I need to fight.
That and the pressure that a cancer patient feels when someone walks up to him and says, have you considered this gentleman who came up with this cure?
Yes.
And the FDA won't allow him to continue it or whatever, those kinds of stories. And there may be legitimacy to it. I don't know. But it's the premise of, gee, you really haven't done your homework. You're really,
this is going to be a whole episode.
You're really kind of failing there. Yeah.
I think we're going to have a great conversation on that. Yeah.
I think this for me is that one great concept that's given me a lot of peace is what I call my exit strategy. I mean, one thing about my worldview and my spirituality is that I'm guaranteed a place in the afterlife. And, I could support that in scripture and all that, but that is huge. What happens to me in this cancer journey is not the final say. There's a whole nother existence after. And I know there's a lot of people that don't believe that, and that's okay. I'm not here to persuade or convince or anything. I just know within my heart and soul of what I believe the truth is. But that gives me a lot of peace, my exit strategy.
There's an underlying premise that we have in this podcast, and that isn't that we have all the answers, but it is that we're going to share our lives. And to the degree that our lives help, that people find hope in and some level of overlap of opportunity and or things that they relate to, that's awesome. But it isn't that we have all the answers. It's, here's our journey, and we like to call them trail markers. Here's trail markers of the path that you've been on, Peter, in your cancer journey. And it has a lot of meaning because it's real. But it doesn't mean it's everybody's trail. But I think there's things we can encourage that are really, really good along the way. And so I think in the vein of what we're talking about here, I like this idea of thinking about what you really control in recovery. One of the first things that happens, I think, in maybe the first book of the CR step studies, asks, what do you have control of? And you take time to think about it. And it's like, well, and when you start thinking hard about it and you start, well, what do I really have control over? And that is a good question for you to answer. And everybody's going to have their own answer for that because it's not black and white like you might think it is. But certainly, I think benevolent detachment starts to let go of controlling outcomes and releasing those to God. And that, I think, moves you to that place where you can give, if it's not the greatest, one of the greatest gifts you could ever give to your family and those around you. That's a non-anxious presence.
Yeah. I mean, I think for me, in my relationships, I had a lot of, before I got into recovery, I had a lot of unhealthy anger, which when I got into recovery and did my inventory process and did the process of what's being triggered, my whole anger issue was centered around the fact that I wanted to control people in my life. I wanted them to respond the way I wanted them to me and to situations and circumstances around them. And so through recovery and through detachment, I entered into a place of saying, hey, I'm responsible for my side of the street only, and I'm not responsible for their side of the street. So that's their journey.
Can I throw out a few things that would tell me it tells me where somebody's at? For myself, it tells me where I'm at too. And so if you think about whether or not you're a non-anxious presence, I've seen a couple of category errors out there. One is one that is like people are just anxious and they're just trying to do everything. And it's like, so that's one area. Those are pretty obvious. This person is so anxious and they're hard to be around because they're panicking and they're just running all over the place. And then there's the complete reverse is everything's perfect. Got it all together, buttoned up, and they're not really together, but they're putting on strength. And so I see this a lot with cancer patients that putting on the face of strength. And they're actually living, a lot of these people, in fear because they're afraid that their family won't be able to handle if they're not putting on strength. And I think what I'm describing, what I've seen in the non-anxious presence, are people who can share the real journey and let go of the outcome. And so if you're in a place, a way of knowing is like, are you sharing your journey? Or is it a private journey? Are you able to express your hurts and fears and emotions? Or are those things that are bottled up inside? And if you're at a place where you're able to share those things, anxiety isn't sharing that there are real pains and real fears, living as an anxious presence. All of us are going to feel anxiety. It's when you feel it, what do you do with it? How do you process it? And is it real? And I think when you start to see people that are talking about what's really going on, and then they're expressing how they're turning it over, now you're starting to see somebody, I think, who's living a non-anxious presence. And those are the people that you're really wanting to, really connect with deeply. Sure. Because somebody who's been on a position of strength, it's like, going into, a big party and they are the all put together person. And, it's like, I don't have anything in common with you. I can't talk with you. Right. And those who are too anxious to even talk to, you're like, you're freaking me out. I can't even, I just can't be around you. It's too much. Yes.
Yeah. I mean, I've been in both places because I believe there's pressure within the church to put on the everything's fine face. Yes. And I've done it. I've put on the everything is fine face. Meanwhile, inside of me, fear, anger, and sadness were just, it was a turmoil. And so, but my kids have been with me. The interesting thing is they've been with me when I've had these end of life prognoses and treatments and major surgeries and all that. And I have not sugarcoated my feelings with them. And that's been a positive, what you're saying. I've been vulnerable. I haven't stayed in a place, as we know from my journey, of being stuck in like depression, that kind of thing. But I've dealt with those feelings of depression and sadness and anger and all that. And I've been vulnerable about it many times. And you're right. That is when the non-anxious presence is a genuine, when you're honest and vulnerable about your feelings and what's happening inside. And yet you are still putting one foot in front of the other, and you're experiencing healing in your life and peace. That is, you're right. That's a non-anxious presence. It's kind of like, I think of the soldier who's in the thick of battle and they're able to assess, yes, I could get shot right now, and so could my buddy, but I'm going to, I've got a job to do, and I'm going to do what my training tells me to do, that kind of thing where the process still goes on, but it's not a denial of the feelings.
Right. Denial of reality.
Yes. Of a reality. Yeah.
So I think what you're really hearing is the whole point of this is benevolent detachment means living in reality, not being afraid to look at reality straight in the face. But I think my opinion has been for a while, and the same thing with this, because I think benevolent detachment is a non-anxious presence, and those two go hand in hand. And the only way you can get there is to have a higher power. And our belief is that Jesus Christ is the only higher power who could get you to a point where you could live truly with benevolent detachment, with a non-anxious presence in your life, because it gives you a place to live in reality. He gives you a place to live in reality and to carry that burden and to turn over the outcomes. You don't have to hold on to the outcomes any longer. You can live in peace, knowing that the outcome is settled by him.
It's huge. I mean, benevolent detachment for me is more than just everything and everyone. It's myself. It's my future, my finances, my soul, my life. I give it over. And my children, all that, but it's huge.
And
it's a huge pathway to peace.
In the midst of that, you're giving that your family and those around you the gift back of yourself, because you're not hiding and you're not so frazzled that you can't communicate and live in community. You're giving them the gift of yourself.
Right.
And so it's just a really big gift overall. And so I don't have a whole bunch more to share at the moment on this, but I think it gives an idea of maybe some tools to get there, some ways of knowing, assessing where are you at in your journey? Are you at non-anxious presence, or are you feeling anxiousness? Are you living this journey out in anxiousness? And if you are, take some time to think about, assessing that. Where is it coming from? What are you really anxious about? And whether or not you could turn that over.
Yeah, it's another trail marker, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So some of the tools that we mentioned in this podcast, the 30-day journey on the Pause app with the Wild at Heart team. You can connect through your website, Cancer and Peace, to get there and see some of those resources. You can still even get this book, Failure of Nerve, is still available out there. Edwin died before he finished the work, but it was such a really good work that he put together that is still unpublished today. But there's so many resources, but looking at the starting point of the simplest thing of doing a heart check and taking time to just write down where you're at. And then that statement, Lord, I give everything and everyone to you.
Yeah, the heart check is huge.
A starting point.
Yes.
So if you start on that journey, I think you'll find that it's a journey towards benevolent detachment, and you can start letting go of unhealthy attachments, and that's a journey to peace.
Great, Sean. Great topic.
That's a wrap for today's podcast. Thank you, everyone, for joining. Go to cancerandpeace.com. You also find Peter's book, and you're going to find more episodes of this podcast. And we just appreciate you listening, and have a great day.
Thanks, Sean.